Thank you for joining us. This is the Invisible Man, and I have on the line with me modern day abolitionist Miss Ida Hakim, who is also called Pharaoh's daughter, for her assistance in helping the Honorable Silis Muhammad make his way into the United Nations on behalf of Afrodescendants. Hello, Miss Hakim. How are you today?
I'm very well. Salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Well, it's time to talk about the historical actions you were a part of. But before we get specifically there, let me ask you the very first question. Can Afro-descendants fulfill their fight for reparations by approaching the American government in the battle for what their ancestors deserve, which is for all of the unpaid labor they gave for 310 years?
That's a really good question, because a lot of people, I think, believe that's the only option. I see some that are going to their city for reparations, some that are going to the U.S. government for reparations. I see that the U.S. government delayed any conversation about that for a long time. And it's my viewpoint, my viewpoint is that Afrodescendants are scattered across the region of the Western Hemisphere in a number of different countries. These are all, it could be one family got separated to Brazil and Jamaica and the United States. We don't know where the families were scattered, but they are scattered across that entire region. And I certainly believe that reparations are due for the entire family. That would mean a lot of different governments would need to be involved in paying those reparations, including the U.S. government. And it would mean that there would be friends at the United Nations. Certainly there might be countries that would stand in support of this reparations call. So my favor, of course, falls toward the United Nations. That's where we did our work. And that's where the umbrella pretty much covers the entire family. And as you remember last time, we talked about the chosen people concept, that the biblical chosen people have, we have a family that has claimed to be the chosen people. And I kind of contested that last week and said, I'm not so sure that there's any evidence that was the case. And so we're looking at, instead, could the chosen people be the Afro-descendants who are scattered across the region? And I think there's a very good likelihood that they are. So there might be some level of success in approaching the U.S. government, but I would think the chances are, and the support would be much stronger if the United Nations was approached by Afro-descendants from across the region, and the United Nations stepped in to help bring this to pass. It's a very nice, a very comforting thought. I think it would really serve the chosen to do it that way.
Okay. In relation to that, the question is, when the term Pharaoh is used, does it apply to the President of the United States? Why or why not?
Well, right now, it appears that the President of the United States doesn't really have much power. He's a figurehead, and it's been that way for a while. A couple of decades ago, Mr. Muhammad chose the United Nations as in which to bring that message. And that would mean, of course, that that would be the seat of government. The seat of global government would be Pharaoh's court. And that makes sense to me, that Pharaoh's court would be in the global government because the Afrodescendants are scattered across the region from many different countries. So it would need to be the court of the global government.
Yes, ma'am. Now, we're getting closer to the exact title and topic. So the question now is, in your fulfillment of Pharaoh's daughter, it involves your contribution to the liberation of Afro-descendants as you assisted the Honorable Silis Muhammad in entering into the UN. How do you feel about making that particular history?
Well, I feel to be referred to as Pharaoh's daughter. That's a privilege and an honor. I appreciate it. And I also, out of modesty, must realize that there are a number of my peers, reparations supporters from white America, that have stood in favor as well. So, there is one Pharaoh's daughter in there.
Okay.
And yeah, and I prefer to look at it that way. I'm honored to be referred to as such, and it is a privilege.
Well, is it incorrect? And I think you just answered that, to call you Pharaoh's daughter, and you just gave a wonderful explanation. Thank you so much. Now let's get to the actual historical part. If you would, please take the listeners back to the moment when you decided to assist Mr. Muhammad and share how you did it. If you could, step by step, take your time, and I promise not to interrupt. So just let us know.
All right, I will. I've thought about this, for many years, thought about how it came to pass. Back in about 1983, I married a Black man who had once been a member of the nation and who had left the nation upon the passing of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And we got together, and, I cared for him a great deal. And I saw that he really wanted to be associated with the nation. And it was a sadness on his part that he could not be. And so I wrote to Mr. Silis Muhammad with a question of, what can I do? This is the issue. What can I do? And he answered back in the Muhammad Speaks newspaper a couple of months later that I could support the call for reparations. That was something I had never thought of. And I didn't even know very much about what reparations would be. On giving it some thought, I thought, whoa, boy, white people are going to want to kill me for this. And I said, I'll go ahead and do it anyway. That was the answer to my question. How can I help? And the answer was support reparations. So I began to study. I remember a conference in DC where I met Queen Mother Dorothy Lewis, and she gave me a bunch of materials on reparations. And I started to learn about it and learn about the different organizations and so forth. But it wasn't until, that was probably about 1988 or 89. And I think it was around 1992 that Mr. Muhammad asked me to see if I could establish a consultative NGO. That's a non-governmental organization. You need to qualify for that in order to be able to approach the United Nations on behalf of civil society. So the organization has to have a certain number of members. It has to have certain qualifying work that it's done. And it was quite a challenge because at the moment, at that point in time, there was already an NGO that represented American minorities. It was called IRAM, International Human Rights Association of American Minorities. And it was headed by Dr. Cly and his wife. And one NGO cannot go in and establish a society group for which another NGO already exists. So knowing that Mr. Muhammad knew that he had to accomplish more than he could with Iran. And so he asked me to see what I could do. And I thought about it. I can't establish this organization for Afrodescendants, so I am going to establish an organization for white people who support reparations.
Yes, ma'am.
And I did that. It was in about 92 that we established the organization as a nonprofit. Then we had to build it, of course. And I've met and worked with some really wonderful people, really good, strong reparations supporters who came in with me, and we wrote books. We went on radio and television shows. We worked to establish the organization. We worked hard to make it international. And what I did during that time was I fulfilled all of the obligations that you have to fulfill in order to qualify to be a consultative NGO. And it was about in 1997 that I was informed our organization would be considered at the meeting in New York with regard to the consultative NGOs. So I attended that meeting, and I remember going there with Maya Hadi. She was an ambassador, as was I. And we went to that meeting. Of course, I was very nervous. The CURE, Caucasians United for Reparations and Emancipation, came up, and there was only one small argument against it, saying we did not have enough international members. We had probably 3 or 4, and we had 150 members altogether. So we did get the NGO status. And that was, I felt like that was an enormous achievement. It really, really made me happy, because that means, and we can go in. We were informed that we could submit a statement to the subcommission. What's it called? Subcommission on Promotion and Protection of Human Rights of Minorities. So
yes, ma'am.
We wrote, I got together with Mr. Muhammad, a written to the subcommission, and submitted that. And sure enough, probably 2 or 3 months later, we got an invitation to attend the United Nations Working Group on Minorities in Geneva. First meeting that we attended, and I'll always remember it, because at that meeting, there were experts from, let's see, the chief expert was from Norway. There was one from Chile, Mr. Bengoa. There was Mr. Martinez from Cuba. There was an expert from Russia. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. And there was one from Morocco. So we group of experts, they were all subcommissioners, and Attorney Abu Bakr, Mrs. Muhammad spoke, and I spoke, and Mr. Muhammad spoke. We all spoke to that particular meeting. And what Mr. Muhammad asked for, it was, he asked for a forum, for the United Nations to organize a forum so that Afro-descendants across the country, all of the region of the Americas, could come together and discuss reparations. And it was really exciting, in that a forum was something that this organization supported. And throughout our tenure at the United Nations, that very first request that he made, they organized altogether 3 forums for Afro-descendants to be able to come together and discuss reparations, and discuss what is even more vital, and that is collective identity. Because to be recognized by the United Nations, you do need to have a collective identity. And to make a claim of violation of human rights, you also need to have standing. So those things are really what was achieved at the UN, and it is a considerable achievement in that Afrodescendants had no recognition prior to this time, no collective recognition. They had no, we can openly say there was no human rights that are granted to minorities. That's the right to speak your own language, the right, worship according to your own religion, and so forth. All of those rights had been destroyed. So not only was there a very good case for reparations, for damages, but there was achieved collective recognition by the body and recognition by the group itself, the Afrodescendants, a chosen name and a chosen identity, and even a definition of what an Afro is included in the work that was accomplished. It was quite wonderful.
Well, and it's a part of history now.
Yes, it is. It's part of history now. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to take a moment to ask about what you just said. When you were given the task to form the Non-Governmental Organization, that's an NGO, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
You had to study how to do it.
Oh, yes. There's a complex set of rules and things you have to do in order to qualify. A certain amount of time and energy and organization has to be put in, and then we had to gain members as well. So
Yes,
it was a big task. It took, well, let's say 93 to 97. So it took about 5 years gaining members and writing books and meeting together. And it took a lot of effort. I really appreciate who joined with me in that organization. That some of them are still around and still friends.
Yes, ma'am. Well, with the establishment of the NGO, the Non-Governmental Organization, the question is, with the establishment of the Non-Governmental Association, you were able to get people on board to assist you, and there didn't seem to be much of a problem with them understanding, because you said something about human rights had been discussed and so forth. So I guess I'm trying to say the world understood, the people, the sub-commissioners understood the plight of us here in America and throughout the diaspora.
They did. And there's something else I can go into as well.
Please.
And we would say, Mr. Muhammad isn't the first one to bring something to the United Nations. There have been other NGOs that went there as well. But we need to look at what covenant did they go there under? What human rights law did they claim was violated?
Mm-hmm.
I know some went under the claim of genocide. Some went under the claim of racism. There was a lot of push for that. The Convention Against Racism. And Mr. Muhammad.
Was that in Durban?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
What Mr. Muhammad had studied, and the particular group that we were encouraged by the UN, had to do with a covenant that protects the right of minorities. Especially, there is one little article in that covenant called Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That covenant protects the right of minorities living in a country to speak their own language, to gather together, to worship together in their own religion, and to not have those rights of identity denied. And that's exactly the rights that were lost in slavery and taken intentionally. The identity was taken. There was no memory of language, no memory of how you worship God, no memory of your culture whatsoever. A few people, perhaps the Maroons and so forth, and the Garifuna, did a little bit of culture. But in most cases, across the entire diaspora, what was destroyed and what is protected under international law is the right of a minority to its identity. So we can say, you know, we did, I remember going to the library with Mr. Muhammad and finding books to confirm that this particular covenant was ratified by the US Congress and so forth. And it was, and it is, I believe, the absolutely correct place to approach, because there's no way that identity can be restored by these governments. You don't know what your language and culture, your identity has been destroyed. And so a new identity has to be achieved. You have to reclaim again for yourselves the identity of who you are. And along with that comes wages and compensation or reparations.
I have one question, and I hope it doesn't sound too silly. Why is it so important to have an identity?
Well, I think identity is inherent in the human being. It's part of being a human being. Being is to know your ancestry, to know what your ancestors believed and what they brought down to you and what they gave to you, to know the language that your ancestors have spoken for how long, the mother tongue that was developed. These things are inherent in the human being, and to destroy them is to destroy something that's vital.
You mentioned another word along with claim right after that. You said standing. And
yeah.
Could you elaborate on that and how it applies to what you were doing standing?
Well, if a group is not recognized, then they don't have it. You know, they don't have any ground to stand on under the law. The attempt had to be made to create a new political identity, and with that political identity could come the right for that group to approach under the law and say, this has been done to our group. We are minorities in many different countries. We've experienced this and so forth. So that would be, the identity would be important to the standing at the United Nations to be able to approach. It doesn't give you right to go before the World Court or anything like that.
Oh.
It's just, no, that it's governments that go to the World Court. It's not civil society. But civil society groups having standing would mean that, yes, we are Afrodescendants and we're bringing this claim as Afrodescendants, recognized by the United Nations as such.
Yes, ma'am. Now, that collective identity was achieved through a forum sponsored by the UN in La Ceiba, Honduras in 2002?
Yes, there were actually, there was a forum held in Geneva. That was the first one was held in Geneva. And the certain powers wanted to direct the people's minds toward racism rather than the rights of minorities. And of course, with racism, it can always, everything can be watered down, and Afrodescendants are no longer a category unto themselves, a defined people. So there was some interventions with regard to racism, and it was there was just basically one statement that was made where Mr. Muhammad called upon them to recognize what rights had been destroyed. And then the one in Honduras was excellent. It came out quite well. There were a number of countries there, representatives of Afrodescendants in different countries, different organizations that were invited. There were translators, and it was in Honduras that the identity was discussed, and the term Afrodescendant was agreed upon as an name for the group, for the collective. And the definition was also written in Honduras, although it was taken, the definition was taken then to the next forum The definition is so important. And I wanted to mention that here in the United States, there are a number of organizations that support reparations. And several of them have articulated as to what, one of them is called ADOS. It's American Descendants of Slaves. And so they're articulating what the group is. The group has an identity. The identity is that we're descendants of enslaved Africans. So that narrows the number. It takes away, people of color. Mm-hmm. It takes away the immigrants from Africa. It takes away a lot that would try to join the group. The group contains only persons who have ancestry that went through enslavement in the United States. So the Afro-descendant definition makes it very clear who this people are, who belongs to this category, Afro-descendant. And that was necessary too, as you're always going to see an attempt to have others join based upon racism and discrimination and so forth. And it needs to be made very clear that this group is from enslaved ancestors.
Something that you said about a nation or government, in terms of the damages, are they paid to organizations, groups? Reparations are actually paid to nations. Is that correct?
Well, in this case, I can't say.
Okay.
I can't say, because I think, there are so many things that need to be worked out by Afro-descendants themselves as to what, worked out as to what the reparations would be, how the reparations would be paid. You need help on that. And that is another reason why the United Nations would help to have the UN involved in the reparations study and decisions with regard to that. Because, that's another one of the ways that they try to weaken the reparations argument, is to cause Afro-descendants to fight among themselves about what it should be and who's in charge and all of those things. So, that's a way to weaken the movement, to cause the people to squabble and argue over who makes what decision. So there really does, and this is just my viewpoint, but there does seem to be a very strong need for more gathering together and more collective decision making. And because the people really do get used and abused when they can't come together and make decisions for themselves as a collective. And it would be wonderful if Afro-descendants from the entire South, Central, and North America could come together. It is the UN who organizes things like that. But, my desire would be to see a coming together and making these decisions. You'd have much more power that way, and would not be so easily caused to argue amongst yourselves.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I think that takes me to the next question, and you are touching on it. What is the next step in securing reparations, in your opinion?
Yeah, that I was, I have, at this point, as a supporter of reparations, my hope would be to see exactly about attempts to organize and include and be inclusive and be, and bring together leadership from across the US and from across the entire diaspora, for that leadership to come together and discuss this and come to a decision as to how the funds or the reparations would be dispersed, and to come to decisions about who qualifies and come to decisions, on many different levels of what reparations would involve. So there needs to be a movement to come together, and that would certainly be my hope, that those decisions can be discussed, and maybe even some assistance provided for Afrodescendants to come together, although I don't know where that assistance would come from. If someone who was extremely wealthy wanted to put some money into that, that would be a good investment.
So for anyone who's listening, that would be a good cause to contribute to.
It surely would,
Yes, ma'am. Now, go ahead.
I was just going to say, bring the leaders together, and
yes,
be inclusive.
Okay. From this segment, what is the most important take you'd like for the listeners to receive?
Well, what I'd like the listeners to begin to think about is the fact that Afrodescendants, that the human family that was destroyed in this way, doesn't just exist in the United States. The United States suffered very greatly. Afrodescendants in the US suffered very greatly, maybe more than some in some other countries. But we did a study when we were at the United Nations. We wrote a paper that was submitted at the very end when the door was closed. We submitted a paper, and it pointed out that Afrodescendants across the entire region were at the bottom, everywhere. I attended an event in Peru, and went to the city center, and it looked like a few different buildings, and it would be the south side of Chicago. The people are the same. These are your brothers and sisters. They look the same. They are the same. They, there's a different culture and a different religion and a different kind of cultural programming, but these are the same people. And so I would, like to, when people are arguing about, I want the city of Evanston to pay reparations, that doesn't seem like reparations to me. That it's a good idea, and if they want to provide that, that's fine. But reparations deals with the entire human family. And, that I would hope that concept would begin to enter people's minds as to how much stronger the family is in its large numbers of 250 million individuals. And the possibility that there are some governments around the world who would support this if it reaches the level of, if it reaches their ears, and they realize that they can support the Afrodescendant family in obtaining reparations. And I also would like people to think about who would pay the reparations. There are companies that still exist. I remember Deidre Farmer-Pahlman worked in determining universities. There are governments that participated. There's the Roman Catholic Church, for sure, that holds a responsibility. And so, give some thought as to who would be called upon to pay reparations. Governments involved, yes. Anything else? Anyone else? And put the mind there, because I think that there are quite a few who are culpable and might want to step up and offer to pay reparations. Yes, ideally, as I come to talking to white people about this, I believe this is, in essence, a spiritual matter. And, we treat it as political, but for me, it's spiritual. And I think it should be for white people in general. Stop acting like somebody's trying to grab $10 out of your pocket. That's silly. It's silly to react against reparations by thinking that you're going to be called to pay something out of your pocket. Stop the wars and turn that money toward reparations. That is a spiritual solution.
Wow. I want to throw out a term. Maybe it's appropriate at this juncture, maybe not. But as you were speaking, the term original sin, and it's been used with slavery, and it hasn't really been addressed. What do you think?
Well, I remember being taught about that when I was a little kid, and it scared me to death. Oh my God, I don't want to commit the original sin. I wonder what it is.
Oh,
So you, a kid, you're
hmm,
imagining those things. I don't know. I don't know. Actually, for me, for myself personally, I would say a separation from your mercy, a separation from God. That
hmm.
is a sin against yourself. And I do believe that over the hundreds and hundreds of years in which crimes have been committed against people around the world, white people have been separated from their own merciful human core. And I would like to see that restored to us. So that's my thought on original sin.
That's the prescription to come back to humanity.
To come back to your human core, to understand who you are, that there is no one who is other. There's no one that you can go and bomb and take their resources. You cannot do that. You can't grab somebody up and make them a slave. You cannot do that and still be a merciful human being.
Yes, ma'am. Well, we are getting close to the end. We have a few more minutes. If I could throw out a term and you can tell me the significance of it, and that term is human rights. What does that make you think of? Just the word, the two words, human rights.
Well, I hadn't really thought about that, and asked it, but
Hmm.
uh, human rights. I think we have a right to freedom, and I obviously we have a right to our culture and our ancestry. We have a right to water. We have a right to, many different things are human rights. Uh, and Certainly, what happened to Afrodescendants was absolute destruction of their human rights. So that's about as eloquent as I can get on that. I really
That
haven't
was
thought
very
much
good.
about it.
Are there any closing comments you'd like to make?
Well, I want to thank you for bringing these interviews forward. I enjoy it. I thank you for. I hope that this is listened to and that it helps people understand a little more what the international aspect of reparations involves and how much uh, spreading the identity of Afrodescendant across the entire region strengthens the argument for reparations and it brings it closer to a reality. So I hope that helps.
Oh, yes, ma'am. And thank you. You're a very important person. As I began the segment, I introduced you as a modern day abolitionist, which is very important. Someone who has taken up the champion and wanting people to live better. And you have done that. Now, do you have any idea what our next segment will cover? Where would you like to
Oh,
go?
well, I'll put some thought into that and see if there are
Okay,
some other things I'd like to speak about. I
sure.
really, I like to talk about what white people can achieve for themselves as human beings by supporting the call for reparations for both Afro-descendants and indigenous peoples. I feel like those are two crimes that we have to deal with. And in dealing with it, we actually return to ourselves a far stronger, far more evolved spiritual consciousness.
That was very eloquent. So I think the title of the next show will be What Can White People Do to Help Themselves?
Oh, how cool. Okay.
All right, so that'll be the next topic. I'll let you think about it, and if you have no more comments, we're going to end the program for tonight. Thank you again, Ms. Hakim.
Well, thank you very much.
All
Thank you
right.
very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I'm
Salam
alaikum.
alaikum. Walaikum salam.